In Traverse County, Minnesota, in the last hard weeks of 1882, a man named Matthias Keller stood inside a ruin and cut a doorway where no sane settler would have put a home. The walls around him were not cabin walls. They were 4.5 feet of limestone, stacked for an old army cold store that had been abandoned when the frontier post moved west. No porch, no proper windows, no chimney, no title deed clean enough to satisfy a clerk. Just a squat stone box half buried in prairie grass, with blocks so heavy 2 horses would have struggled to drag one. And Matthias Keller was measuring it as if it were a gift. By noon, 3 men had ridden up from Morris. The first was Edwin Lark, the county land agent, wrapped in a black coat that made him look official, even in heat. The second was a carpenter named Abel Cray, who had built half the cabins along the river bend, and believed, with the certainty of a man who had survived one winter, that stone was death in January. The third was only there because he wanted to watch the argument. Lark climbed down from his horse and stared at the rafters Matthias had already squared. 12 inches by 12 inches. Too heavy for a barn, too expensive for a mistake. "Mr. Keller," he said, "I am going to speak plainly." Matthias lowered the adze. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with mortar scars in the cracks of his hands and an old country stillness that other men mistook for stubbornness. Lark pointed at the ruin. "This parcel is not part of your filed quarter. This structure was federal property before the county ever mapped the road. You have no right to improve it." Then Abel Cray laughed, once. Not cruelly, worse. Knowingly. "You are roofing a meat locker," he said. "That is all it ever was. 4 feet of stone and no sun. Come December, your children will sleep inside a grave." Matthias looked from one man to the other. Behind him, the limestone held the noon heat on its outer face. Inside, the air was still. He did not argue about law. He did not argue about pride. He only rested one hand against the stone and said, "It is already stronger than anything I can afford to build." Lark's mouth tightened. "Strength is not warmth." Matthias lifted the adze again. "No," he said, "but it can hold it." That was the sentence they carried back to town. Not because they understood it, because it sounded like the kind of thing a desperate man says before winter proves him wrong. Matthias Keller was not a farmer by nature. He could plant potatoes. He could mend harness. He could milk a cow badly enough to offend the cow and still fill a pail. But he had not been raised to read soil. He had been raised to read stone. Before America, he had worked in the limestone yards outside Solothurn, where walls were not temporary shelter, but arguments with time. He knew how a block breathed after rain. He knew the dull note of a sound stone under the hammer. He knew that a wall was not simply something you stood behind. A wall could be a weight, a memory, a machine. The prairie had taught him that last word the hard way. His first winter in Minnesota came inside a conventional settler cabin made quickly because speed was survival. The neighbors had helped him raise it in 2 days. Cottonwood logs, mud chinking, a board roof, one iron stove in the middle, glowing red for weeks until the metal looked angry. Everyone told him it would do. It did not. The cabin did not hold warmth. It merely borrowed it for minutes at a time. By December, the seams had opened. The mud between the logs dried, cracked, and fell away in hard crumbs. Wind found every joint. Snow dust sifted through the wall at night and gathered in pale lines along the floorboards. His wife Elise slept with their youngest child inside her coat. Their son Otto woke every morning with frost on his lashes. The stove demanded wood as if it were an animal with no bottom to its hunger. Matthias cut until his gloves froze stiff. He hauled until the horse bled at the shoulders. He burned through the first cord, then the second, then the third. And still, at 3 a.m, the cabin became a box of cold air with a red eye in the center. What broke him was not the misery, it was the waste. He would feed the stove before bed until the stovepipe ticked and the room grew too hot to breathe. Elise would push the children away from it so their blankets would not scorch. Then the fire would fall, the air would cool. The walls, which had never warmed at all, would pull the heat out of the room like wet wool pulling warmth from skin. By dawn, the water pail wore a crust of ice. All that labor, all that wood, gone through cracks in the dark. Most settlers blamed the weather. Matthias blamed the house. A light wall could stop snow. It could not store a season. That was why the abandoned cold store would not leave his mind. It stood on a small rise near the old military road, built years before by men who feared spoilage more than comfort. Its walls were thick, because thick walls slow the world down. Summer heat took days to reach the center. Winter cold did the same. Everyone else saw the cold part. Matthias saw the delay. The delay was the miracle, not warmth by itself. Time. By late August, he had decided. He would not build another thin box for the prairie to empty. He would turn the stone box into a flywheel. The work looked foolish because the important part could not be seen. First, he cleared the ruin. Burdock, snake grass, broken bottles, mouse nests, old army nails black with rust. Then he studied the walls. The limestone blocks were roughly dressed, but sound, each one locked under the one above it by weight and patience. In places, the mortar had fallen back almost 2 inches. Those gaps mattered more than any man in town understood. A draft the width of a pencil could steal a night's fire. So Matthias made mortar. Lime, sand, clay, and water mixed in a trough until it held the knife mark. For 11 days he packed every joint by hand. Not beautifully, tightly. After the joints came the roof. He raised a low-hipped frame with white oak rafters so wind could climb over it instead of tearing at a gable end. The rafters were absurdly oversized, but Matthias wanted weight bearing down evenly on stone that had not been designed for domestic corners. He set planks, then cedar shingles, then a second layer at the windward edge, because the northwest wind did not care what was ordinary. Abel Cray rode past twice and shook his head both times. "A roof does not make a house," he called. Matthias did not answer. He was thinking about the chimney. That was the part that made the ruin either genius or madness. A normal chimney carries heat away. A frontier stove made a room bright for an hour and sent most of its strength into the sky. Matthias wanted the smoke to work before it left, so he cut a shallow chamber into the inside of the north wall and built a stone hearth there. Behind it, instead of a straight flue, he laid a rising channel through the thickness of the masonry, turning the smoke twice before it reached daylight. Not enough to choke the fire, enough to make the heat rub itself against stone. He was not building a fireplace. He was teaching the wall to eat flame slowly. Elise understood before anyone else did. She watched him set the last field stone in the hearth and asked, "Will it be warm right away?" Matthias shook his head. No. Her face tightened. Then he said, "But once it is warm, It will not forget quickly. By October, the legal pressure returned. Edwin Lark came with a folded notice, sealed in red wax, and the patience of a man who believed paper should settle reality. Matthias was hanging the door. Not a grand door, 2 layers of plank with felt and tar between them, heavy enough that it closed with the thick sound of a vault. Lark read the notice aloud. 30 days to vacate. Unauthorized occupation. Federal structure. County liability. Removal at owner's expense. Matthias listened to every word. Then he took the paper, turned it over, and used the blank side to mark the latch plate. Lark flushed. Do you understand what you are risking? Matthias looked into the doorway, where Elise was sweeping dust from the stone floor, and Otto was stacking kindling in a dry corner. He understood better than the agent could. A second winter in a leaking cabin was not an inconvenience. It was a verdict. Yes, Matthias said. I understand. Lark waited. Matthias tapped the latch into place. This winter, he said, my family will not live inside the wind. The first cold wave arrived before Thanksgiving. It did not drift in politely. It dropped. One afternoon, the river was moving black between banks. The next morning, the shallows were sealed with ice hard enough to ring under a boot heel. Then the real cold came down from the north. Not a storm, not a blizzard, a still, punishing cold that made sound travel strangely far and turned every breath into white powder. For 17 nights, the temperature fell below 30 degrees under zero. The town became a collection of chimneys and closed doors. Cabins smoked day and night. Roof lines grew gray with frozen vapor. Axes rang in timber lots before sunrise because men who had already cut enough for winter discovered that enough was a word the prairie did not honor. Abel Cray's wife hung quilts over the cabin walls. Edwin Lark kept his ink bottle inside his shirt during office hours. The stove in the land office burned so hot that visitors had to stand back from it, but the corners of the room still held frost. That was the old settlement rhythm. Fire as panic, heat as emergency, wood as time bought by the armload. Inside the stone house, the rhythm was different. On the first night of deep cold, Matthias built a deliberate fire. Not a roaring one, a steady one. Dry oak at the back, split ash across the front, draft half open. Flame licking the fieldstone throat of the hearth, smoke turning through the hidden channel and warming the buried shoulder of the north wall. For 3 hours the fire worked. Then Matthias banked the coals and shut the iron damper halfway. Elise waited for the familiar fall. She knew how cold arrived in a cabin after the flames sank, first at the ankles, then at the hands, then in the lungs. But the cold did not come. The room cooled a little, then stopped. The air seemed to rest against something larger than itself. At midnight, Otto kicked off one blanket. At 2, Elise woke because she had not heard Matthias rise for wood. At dawn, the water in the pail was liquid, not merely unfrozen. Room cool. She put her palm on the south wall, farthest from the hearth. It should have bitten her skin. Instead, it answered with the faintest living warmth. She stood there for several seconds, hand flat against the stone, afraid to speak and break the proof. By the 4th day, the difference became impossible to hide. The Kellers burned one evening fire, sometimes one morning fire if the wind changed. The neighbors burned all day and still slept in coats. Matthias had estimated the matter with Mason's arithmetic. 1 foot of his wall stood 8 feet high and 4.5 feet thick. That meant 36 cubic feet of limestone in a single running foot. At roughly 160 pounds per cubic foot, that strip of wall weighed more than 5,700 pounds. Limestone does not warm easily. That was the point. To raise that 1 foot section by 1 degree took well over 1,000 BTUs of heat, and the house had nearly 100 feet of wall. A thin cabin had almost nothing to store the fire after the flame died. Matthias's house had hundreds of tons of slow patience wrapped around the room. The fire heated the air first, then the hearth, then the wall. The wall accepted the heat grudgingly, block by block, hour by hour. And after the fire fell, the wall gave it back just as slowly. The neighbors thought Matthias had found a way to make one fire stronger. He had not. He had found a way to make one fire longer. That distinction saved his family. The darkest night came in early December. A north wind rose after sunset, fine and dry, blowing loose snow so hard it did not fall, but hissed sideways through the grass. Edwin Lark left Morris too late. He had gone to inspect a disputed fence line and misjudged the sky. By the time he turned back toward town, the road was gone under drifting snow, and his horse began stumbling from rut to rut. He could not see the river bend. He could not feel his cheeks. The only shape he recognized was the low roof on the rise, black against the blown white. Matthias's illegal house. Lark hated that he had to knock. The door opened. Warm air touched his face. For one foolish second, he thought the house must be on fire. Matthias looked at the ice in Lark's beard, then stepped aside. No lecture, no triumph, no mention of the notice. Elise took his coat before it froze in its shape. She gave him broth in a tin cup. Otto led the horse into the lee of the wall, where a little shed roof broke the wind. Lark stood inside the room and tried to understand what his body already knew. The hearth held only a modest bed of coals. There was no iron stove roaring red, no smell of scorched dust, no children pressed against the fire like beggars. There was bread wrapped in cloth on the table. There were mittens drying on pegs. There was a candle flame standing almost perfectly upright, untouched by draught. The room did not feel hot. It felt held. That was worse for Lark than heat. Heat could be explained by fuel. Held warmth meant the building itself was participating. Matthias gave him a blanket near the hearth, and Lark lay down fully dressed, expecting the old frontier pattern. The coals would fade, the air would sink. He would wake at 2 a.m. with cold inside his ribs and pride in his throat. But when he woke, the room was dark and he was sweating. Not near the fire, not under too many blankets, sweating inside a stone ruin on the coldest night he had ever ridden through. He sat up. The hearth showed only a dull red seam under ash. The north wall behind it, though, seemed to breathe. Lark stood in his socks and walked to the far side of the room. The stone floor was cool, but not cruel. He placed his palm against the west wall. He had touched cemetery stone in winter. He knew what stone was supposed to do to a hand. This did not. It held a low, steady warmth, so faint that he almost denied it. Then he kept his hand there and felt the truth deepen. The wall was giving back yesterday's fire. On the window ledge sat a crock of milk Elise had left there after supper. Lark opened it. No ice skin. Beside it, a small pan of rendered fat remained soft enough to dent with a finger. In his own office that morning, the ink had frozen inside the bottle. In this unlawful stone box, that on a windowsill had not hardened through the night. That was the moment Edwin Lark stopped seeing a trespass. He saw a measurement. By dawn, the wind had dropped. Lark stepped outside and looked back at the house. Snow lay against the walls in long blue drifts. Smoke lifted from the chimney in a thin, controlled thread. Not a desperate column, not the continuous gray plume every cabin in town was throwing into the sky. Just a thread. Matthias was splitting wood beside the east wall. Lark approached with the notice still folded in his coat pocket. He did not apologize. Official men rarely know how. Instead, he asked, "How much wood have you burned since the cold started?" Matthias set another round on the block. "Less than half a cord." Lark stared. "Half?" "For this house," Matthias said. Lark looked at the woodpile, then at the walls, then at the chimney. Every piece of the answer was visible now, but only because one freezing night had forced him to stand inside it. The county did not withdraw its objection immediately. Paper moves slowly, especially when pride is folded inside it. But Lark's report changed tone. He no longer described Keller as a squatter occupying abandoned property. He wrote that the structure had been stabilized, weatherproofed, and adapted at private expense. He noted that the walls were no longer deteriorating. He noted, with unusual care, that the building required far less fuel than standard timber dwellings during severe cold. He did not write the sentence that mattered. He had been wrong. Word traveled without needing his honesty. A freight driver told a blacksmith. The blacksmith told a church elder. By January, men who had laughed at the stone house were asking Matthias about mortar, not because they admired him, because their woodpiles were disappearing. Abel Cray came last. He brought no apology either, only a question and a carpenter's suspicion. "Why is it not damp inside?" Matthias showed him the answer. The roof carried water away. The joints were sealed. The fire did not merely warm the room. It dried the masonry from within. The thick walls did not swing wildly from hot to cold, so moisture did not gather and freeze the way it did on thin surfaces. Abel listened with his arms crossed. Then he stepped to the south wall and touched it the same way Lark had. A man can argue with another man. It is harder to argue with your own hand. By spring, the Keller house had become a small embarrassment to the settlement, not because it failed, because it worked too well. The county could dismiss a dream. It could dismiss foreign habits. It could dismiss a stonemason's pride. But it could not dismiss a house that used a third of the fuel and kept children warm through a cold wave that had emptied half the woodlots along the bend. Matthias did not invent thermal mass. He did not need the phrase. The old world had built with it long before the prairie learned to print land maps. Roman hypocausts, alpine masonry stoves, cellars that kept summer out, walls that held evening heat until morning. What made his house extraordinary was not that the principle was new, it was that he recognized it inside a structure everyone else had already named useless. They saw a cold wall. He saw a slow wall. They saw dead stone. He saw stored time. Modern engineers would later talk about thermal inertia, heat capacity, conduction, radiant comfort, and passive energy storage. Matthias Keller had no need for those words. He had a wife who slept through the night, a child who stopped coughing, a woodpile that lasted, a candle that did not flicker, a wall that remembered the fire long after the flame was gone. The abandoned cold store had been built to resist the outside world, to keep meat from spoiling, to slow heat, to deny change. Matthias did not fight that purpose. He turned it around. He took a building made to keep warmth out and taught it to keep warmth in. That was the genius. Not more fire, not more fuel, not more force. A better place for the heat to go before it was needed. The prairie did not become kinder. The winter did not become shorter. The wind did not learn mercy. But inside those limestone walls, one poor mason changed the terms of the fight. He stopped trying to outrun the cold hour by hour. He gave yesterday's fire a body, and when morning came, the stone gave it back. He did not teach the prairie to be kind. He taught stone to remember the fire.